Part 1 had worked in the Universal Horror Archive for 37 standard cycles, and in all that time, nothing had ever surprised them. The archive was a place of order, of careful documentation, of facts arranged in neat rows like soldiers standing at attention. Every known threat in the galaxy had its place here, cataloged and cross-referenced and stored in crystalline data cores that hummed softly in the endless dark. The archive floated in orbit around a dead moon, far from any trade routes or populated worlds. This was intentional. The things documented here were not meant for casual viewing. The collective of sentient species had built this place as a warning system, a vast library of dangers that any member world could access when they needed to know what might kill them. Was a being from the ETH Consortium, standing roughly 2 meters tall on 6 jointed legs. Their carapace was a deep blue-black color, and their compound eyes could process information faster than most species could speak. This made them excellent at their job. They could scan thousands of entries in a single work cycle, checking for errors, updating classifications, ensuring that the archive remained accurate. It was during one of these routine audits that first noticed something strange. They had been reviewing the population statistics of the archive's threat database, a simple task meant to ensure the automated systems were functioning correctly. The numbers appeared on their screen in neat columns, showing how many threats had been documented from each region of known space. The ETH home systems had contributed 47 entries. The hegemony had 112. The crystalline beings have had 3. These were reasonable numbers, reflecting the natural dangers that had evolved on various worlds over billions of years. Then looked at the entry for Earth. The number made no sense. Blinked all 4 of their primary eyes and ran the query again, certain there had been some kind of data corruption, but the number remained the same. 12,467 entries. From a single world. A world that had only achieved less than 300 standard years ago. His mandibles clicked together in confusion. They had heard of Earth, of course. Everyone had. The humans were a young species, energetic and curious, spreading through the galaxy with an enthusiasm that older species found either charming or exhausting depending on their temperament. But they were not particularly dangerous. They had no natural weapons, no venomous bites, no armored shells. They were soft, fragile creatures who needed to wear suits just to survive in environments that many species found comfortable. How could such a species have produced more documented threats than the rest of the galaxy combined? Began opening individual entries, and what they found only deepened their confusion. The first entry described a creature called a vampire. According to the documentation, this was a being that appeared human but fed on the blood of living creatures. It could not die except by very specific methods, feared sunlight and religious symbols, and could transform into various animals at will. Check the verification status. The entry was marked as authentic, meaning the archive's automated systems had confirmed it as a genuine threat. The second entry described something called a werewolf. This was a human who transformed into a beast during certain phases of their moon cycle, becoming a savage predator driven only by hunger. Again, the entry was marked as. Continued reading. There were ghosts, which were the spirits of dead humans that refused to stop existing. There were demons, which were beings of pure malevolence from some dimension of suffering. There were creatures that lived under children's beds, creatures that hid in dark water, creatures that could only be seen from the corner of your eye. There were things called serial killers, which appeared to be ordinary humans who had somehow become unstoppable forces of violence, returning again and again, no matter how many times they were killed. There was an entire category of threats classified as eldritch, which seemed to be beings so vast and terrible that merely knowing about them could damage a person's mind. Spent hours reading through the entries, their confusion slowly transforming into something like alarm. These couldn't all be real. The The galaxy was dangerous, certainly, but it wasn't this dangerous. If even half of these creatures actually existed, Earth would be a nightmare world, a death trap where survival was impossible. But the humans seemed fine. They had colonies on dozens of worlds. They sent diplomatic missions to Archive Station regularly. They complained about the quality of food in the cafeteria and asked too many questions and generally behaved like any other young species finding its place in the galaxy. Cross-reference the human threat entries with the Archive's incident database, which tracked every confirmed attack or sighting of cataloged dangers. The results were illuminating. For the ETH entries, there were thousands of confirmed incidents. The razorflies of their southern continent alone accounted for an average of 40 deaths per cycle. For the hegemony, the predators of their jungle worlds were responsible for numerous casualties every year. For the human entries, there were almost no confirmed incidents at all. A few scattered reports, most of them unverified. Some historical records that might have been exaggerated. Nothing that would suggest a species living among 12,000 different types of monster. Sat back and tried to understand what they were looking at. The Archive's automated collection systems gathered data from across the galaxy, pulling information from news reports, scientific studies, cultural databases, and millions of other sources. They were designed to identify and catalog anything that might pose a threat to sentient life. They were very good at their job. They were also, apparently, very literal. Realized what had happened. The systems had scanned human cultural databases and found thousands upon thousands of descriptions of monsters. They had found these descriptions in stories, in films, in songs and poems and children's tales. The systems had processed all of this information and concluded that these creatures must be real threats, because why else would the humans talk about them so much? The humans had not contributed real monsters to the Archive. They had contributed fictional ones. Imaginary creatures, invented for entertainment, treated by the Archive systems as genuine dangers. It was realized, probably the largest data error in the Archive's history. They began composing a report to Archive Command, recommending that all human entries be reviewed and reclassified. The creatures should be moved to a cultural mythology subsection, interesting from an anthropological perspective, but certainly not genuine threats. The Archive's reputation depended on accuracy, and having 12,000 fake entries was embarrassing at best. They submitted the report and waited for confirmation. The response came within the hour, which was unusual. Archive Command typically took days to process routine requests. The message was brief and contained no explanation. Do not reclassify, do not delete, do not discuss this matter with anyone, await further instruction. Read the message 3 times, certain they had misunderstood, but the words remained the same. Archive Command wanted the fake entries to stay exactly where they were, filed among the real threats as if they were equally dangerous. This made no sense. The Archive existed to provide accurate information. What possible purpose could be served by maintaining obviously false data? Before could compose a response, their station's door chimed. Someone was requesting entry. Checked the external sensors and saw a human standing in the corridor. This was unusual. Humans rarely came to this section of the Archive. They preferred the social areas, the cafeteria, the observation decks with views of the stars. They did not generally seek out archivists working alone in data processing centers. The human was female by their species standards, with dark skin and hair arranged in elaborate braids. She wore the formal clothing of a diplomatic, and her expression was pleasant but somehow unsettling. She smiled when the door opened and noticed that humans showed their teeth when they did this. It was the kind of detail that had never bothered them before. But after spending hours reading about vampires and werewolves and things that wore human faces to hide their true nature, found the expression deeply uncomfortable. Archivist, the human said. My name is Doctor. I understand you've been looking into our file. Mandibles clicked nervously. How did you know about that? The human's smile widened slightly. We keep track of who's reading our entries. It's a matter of some importance to us. She stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation, her movements casual but somehow precise, like a predator who saw no need to hurry. We need to talk about why those entries should stay exactly where they are. Part 2. Doctor settled into a chair that had not been designed for human bodies, adjusting herself until she found a comfortable position. She did this without complaint, as if sitting in uncomfortable furniture was simply part of her job. Remained standing, their 6 legs positioned for quick movement toward the door if necessary. They did not truly believe the human was dangerous, but after reading 12,000 entries about creatures that wore friendly faces to hide their hunger, caution seemed wise. You're frightened of me, observed. Her tone was gentle, almost amused. That's interesting. Most species don't find humans particularly scary. I have spent the last several hours reading about things that hide in shadows and drink blood, replied. Forgive me if I am somewhat unsettled. Nodded as if this was entirely reasonable. That's actually why I'm here. You submitted a report recommending those entries be reclassified as mythology. Archive Command rejected it, and now you're confused about why. She leaned forward slightly. I'm here to explain. The entries are clearly fictional, said. Your species invented these creatures for entertainment. They do not exist. The archive is meant to document real threats, not stories. You're absolutely right, agreed. Vampires are not real. Werewolves are not real. The thing that waits in the dark at the bottom of the stairs is not real. She paused. But the entries serve a purpose anyway. That's what I need you to understand. His compound eyes shifted, processing this statement from multiple angles. What purpose could false information possibly serve? Was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider how to explain something complicated. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. What do you know about how humans achieved peace with the hegemony? The question surprised. They were a conquering species, slavers who had terrorized dozens of worlds before mysteriously withdrawing from active expansion. There had been no war with humanity, no treaty that knew of. They had simply stopped expanding in human space. I know very little, admitted. It is not my area of expertise. 40 years ago, said, a raiding party captured a human freighter called the Constellation. 23 crew members, mostly civilians. They intended to sell them on their slave markets, as they had done with countless other species. Nodded, this was typical behavior. The humans were held in a compound on a colony world, continued. Standard procedure. They were kept in cells, interrogated about human military capabilities, and scheduled for transport to auction. What happened? Smiled that strange, teeth-showing smile again. The humans started telling stories, loudly, in the common areas in their cells, anywhere the guards could hear them. They told stories about a creature called the Slasher. Have you read that entry? The Slasher was described as an apparently human figure, usually wearing a mask to hide its damaged face, that stalked and killed people who strayed from safety. According to the entry, the Slasher could not be stopped by conventional weapons, could appear and disappear at will, and was drawn specifically to isolated individuals. The guards heard these stories, said. They thought the humans were trying to frighten them, which they found amusing. They are a proud species. They do not scare easily. Then what? Then guards started dying. Mandibles went still. One by one, continued calmly. Always when they were alone, always in the dark. The bodies showed signs of extreme violence. The other guards found them in maintenance corridors, in storage rooms, in places where they had gone by themselves. The humans killed them. The humans never left their cells, said. The security footage confirmed this. They were locked up the entire time, telling their stories, while something moved through the compound killing guards. Try to process this, but you said the slasher was not real. It isn't. The expression was unreadable. Officially, the deaths were attributed to a malfunction in the compound's automated defense systems. The machines had somehow become confused and targeted the instead of intruders. A terrible accident. But you do not believe that. I believe, said carefully, that 23 terrified humans spent 3 days telling each other stories about an unstoppable killer, and that something answered. Whether it was mass hysteria affecting the guards, or some kind of psychic phenomenon we don't understand, or just an incredibly unlikely series of coincidences, I cannot say. I only know what happened. What happened? The humans were released. The compound was burned, and every captain in that sector received a report about what had occurred, along with a complete collection of human monster stories. Stood and walked to his workstation, pulling up a map of space on the display. This is their territory 40 years ago, she said, highlighting a large region. Then she adjusted the timeline to the present. The highlighted region had shrunk noticeably, with a clear buffer zone around all human-occupied systems. This is their territory now. They have not attempted to capture another human vessel since the Constellation incident. Their official policy lists human ships as no-capture targets. Because of stories, asked, disbelief clear in their voice. Because of what stories can become, returned to her seat. Let me tell you about 4. There were crystalline beings, beautiful and fragile, who communicated through patterns of light. They were also complete pacifists, incapable of violence even in self-defense. 60 years ago, their colony on 4 had faced extinction when a group of raiders discovered their world and began capturing them for sale as luxury goods. A human mining operation nearby had received their distress signal, but they were civilians, not soldiers, and they had no weapons capable of fighting off the raiders. So they started broadcasting, said. Stories again. They shared tales of the golem with everyone who would listen, including the raiders' communication interceptors. Had read that entry too. The golem was a creature of vengeance, shaped from earth or stone, that rose to protect the innocent when no other defense was possible. It could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped, and would not rest until it had destroyed whatever threatened its charges. The raiders picked up these transmissions, continued. They thought it was primitive superstition and ignored it, but then their long-range sensors detected something large moving through the asteroid field near 4, something that was not on any charts, something that seemed to be watching them. What was it? We never found out, admitted. The raiders left before it got close enough to identify. They filed a report claiming the system was too dangerous to approach due to an unknown hostile presence, and no other raiding party ever returned. And the humans? The humans claimed they had no idea what the raiders' sensors had detected, just rocks probably, asteroids drifting in unusual patterns, shrugged. The colony is still there. They've never been attacked again. Was silent for a long moment, processing everything they had heard. You are telling me, they said slowly, that humans weaponized their fictional monsters, that you deliberately spread these stories knowing they would be treated as real threats. I'm telling you that humans have always known something that other species are only beginning to understand, replied. Stories have power. Belief has power. Fear has power. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. But we have spent 100,000 years imagining the worst things that could possibly exist, and we have remembered every single one of them. She gestured at screen, where the list of human monster entries still glowed softly. That archive is not a record of our weaknesses, archivist. It is a record of our weapons. Every creature in that database is a warning to anyone who might threaten us. Attack humanity, and you might awaken something you are not prepared to face. Conquer our worlds, and you might find that our nightmares have become your reality. But they are not real, insisted, though their voice was less certain now. They are as real as fear, said, and fear, archivist, is very real indeed. Before could respond, their console chimed with an urgent notification. Archive Command was requesting immediate communication with all senior staff. Opened the channel and felt their carapace chill at the words that appeared on screen. A hostile fleet from the Outer Rim, calling themselves the Dominion, had entered archive space. They were demanding access to threat data on all member species. They wanted to know what everyone was afraid of. And they had specifically requested the complete Earth file. Part 3. The Dominion had been expanding for 300 years, swallowing world after world with a method that was as elegant as it was cruel. They did not simply conquer with weapons and soldiers. They conquered with fear. Their strategy was well documented. Before attacking any species, they would study their prey's psychology with obsessive attention. They would learn what that species feared most deeply, what shapes haunted their nightmares, what sounds made them freeze with terror. And then they would become those fears. Their soldiers wore armor designed to trigger instinctive panic responses. Their ships broadcast sounds calibrated to activate ancient prey animal reflexes. Their weapons created deaths that matched each species' worst cultural nightmares. By the time they actually attacked, their victims were already half defeated, too terrified to mount effective resistance. They had shattered the collective by becoming their legendary night hunters. They had broken the unity by appearing as the deep swimmers that mythology warned against. Again and again, they had reached into a species' collective unconscious and pulled out the worst thing they found there. Now they wanted to know what humans feared. Archive Command had called an emergency meeting, but could already see the outcome forming. The fleet was large enough to destroy the archive if they wished. The collective could not defend this station against that kind of force. They would have to comply with the data request. Found Doctor in the observation lounge, staring out at the ships that hung in the darkness beyond the station's shields. The human's expression was thoughtful, not frightened, which found strange given the circumstances. "They are going to give them the file," said. "I know," replied. "They will learn everything, every monster your species has ever imagined. They will use it against you." Turned to look at them, and her eyes held something that could not quite identify. It might have been amusement. It might have been anticipation. "Good," she said. His mandibles clicked in confusion. "Good? How can this possibly be good? You explained to me that your monster stories are weapons. Now your enemies will have access to all of them." "They have conquered dozens of species using fear," said. "Do you know why that strategy works?" "Because fear is universal. All sentient beings experience it." "True, but there's something else." Turned back to the window. "The strategy works because most species have bounded fears, specific fears. The feared the night hunters and almost nothing else. The feared the deep swimmers. Each species has one great terror, maybe two, that defines their nightmares. They identify that fear and exploit it." "And humans?" Laughed softly. It was not a happy sound. "Humans fear everything, archivist. We looked at the darkness and saw 1,000 different threats in it. We feared the dead coming back, so we invented ghosts and zombies and vampires. We feared the living becoming monsters, so we invented werewolves and serial killers and demonic possession. We feared the unknown, so we invented creatures from other dimensions, beings from beneath the earth, things from the depths of space that would drive us mad just by existing." She shook her head slowly. "They want to become our fears. They cannot. Our fears are infinite. They contradict each other. They overlap and multiply and spawn new fears from their combinations. A species that tries to embody human terror would have to become everything and nothing at the same time." "You think they will fail?" "I think they will try," said, "and I think the trying will break them." The data transfer happened that evening. Archive Command had no choice but to comply. They received the complete Earth file, all 12,000 entries, along with associated cultural documentation explaining each monster's origins and attributes. Then everyone waited. The fleet remained in position for 3 days, monitored their communications when possible, and what they intercepted was fascinating. The Dominion's command structure was in chaos. Different factions within the fleet were arguing about which human monster to adopt as their template. One faction wanted to become vampires, emphasizing the immortality and the power over victims' minds. Another faction insisted that the werewolf was more terrifying, representing the beast that lurked within all beings. A third group was fascinated by the concept of the ghost, the idea of an enemy that could not be killed because it was already dead. But there were problems with each choice. The vampire feared sunlight and religious symbols, which meant that humans had already developed countermeasures. The werewolf was vulnerable to silver, a metal that humans seemed to have specifically identified as a weakness. The ghost could be banished with proper rituals. Every monster in the human file came with weaknesses. Every nightmare had a dawn that ended it. Humans had not simply invented fears. They had invented fears and then invented ways to defeat those fears, again and again, in story after story across thousands of years. The commanders argued. They debated. They sent demands for clarification to Archive Command, asking which human monster was the real threat, the true fear, the one that humans actually believed in. The answer came back, all of them. On the 4th day, something changed. Was monitoring the flagship when they detected an unusual transmission. It was a recording of a human story, one of the entries from the archive file. The story was being played on the ship's internal communication system, and it was about something called the cosmic horror. This was a category of human monster that had found particularly disturbing. Unlike most creatures in the file, cosmic horrors had no consistent form. They were described as beings so vast, so ancient, so fundamentally alien that the human mind could not comprehend them. Simply knowing they existed could shatter a person's sanity. They could not be fought, could not be reasoned with, could not be escaped. They were the fear of insignificance, the terror of a universe that did not care about human existence at all. They had apparently decided to focus on this category, but there was a problem. The more they studied the cosmic horror entries, the more they realized that these beings were not weapons to be wielded. They were forces that could not be controlled. The stories made clear that anyone who tried to channel or summon such entities was inevitably destroyed by them. The cosmic horror did not serve those who invoked it. It consumed them. And somewhere in the command structure, certain officers had begun to wonder, what if the humans were right? What if, by studying these beings so intensely, by filling their minds with images and descriptions and details of cosmic entities, they were somehow drawing attention they did not want? The communications intercepted became increasingly paranoid. Officers reported seeing things in the corners of their vision. Sensors detected anomalies that might have been equipment malfunctions or might have been something else. Crew members who had spent too long studying the files were starting to behave strangely. It was probably nothing. It was probably stress and suggestion and the natural effects of immersing oneself in nightmare imagery. But they could not be certain. On the 5th day, the fleet. There was no announcement, no explanation. The ship simply turned and accelerated out of archive space, heading back toward the outer rim. Intelligence reports over the following weeks suggested that the Dominion's command structure had experienced what could only be described as a crisis of faith. Several high-ranking officers had been removed from their positions. The project to exploit human psychology had been abandoned entirely. Some reports indicated that they had added a new entry to their own threat database, humanity. But unlike their previous entries, this one did not contain tactical recommendations or exploitation strategies. It contained a single warning. Do not attempt to become what humans fear. Human fear is infinite, contradictory, and self-reinforcing. Their monsters exist in a state of perpetual war with each other and with humanity itself. To adopt any human fear is to become trapped in an endless conflict that cannot be won. The Dominion never approached human space again. Completed their audit a week after the fleet's departure. The human entries remained classified as genuine threats, but they added a personal notation to the file. Status conceptual, threat level existential, origin human collective unconscious. Note, the danger is not that these entities exist. The danger is that humans created them, remember them, and would recognize them if they appeared. Humans have spent their entire existence at war with imaginary monsters, and they have never stopped developing new weapons against those monsters. Any species that attempts to exploit human fear will find that humans have already thought of every possible threat and already devised countermeasures for all of them. The humans cannot be frightened into submission, because they have already frightened themselves with everything the universe could possibly contain. Doctor visited one more time before returning to her diplomatic duties. She found the archivist reviewing the final statistics on the human file, their compound eyes reflecting the glow of thousands of monster entries. "Thank you," said, "for leaving the files intact." "I am not certain I had any choice," replied. "Archive Command made their position very clear. You could have fought it. Many archivists would have." Settled into her usual uncomfortable chair. "Instead, you updated the files with an accurate assessment of their purpose. That takes a certain kind of wisdom." Was quiet for a moment. "I have a question." "Ask." "Do you believe any of them are real? Your monsters, your nightmares. After everything that has happened with thee and the, do you believe that human imagination can actually create real things?" Consider the question seriously. "I believe," she said finally, "that reality is more flexible than we like to think. I believe that consciousness shapes the universe in ways we do not fully understand. And I believe that 100 billion humans, all imagining the same monster, all believing in the same fear, might create something that is very close to real even if it started as pure fiction." She stood and walked to the door, then paused. "But here is what I really believe, Archivist. I believe that it does not matter whether our monsters are real. What matters is that we act as if they are. We prepare for them. We develop ways to fight them. We tell stories about defeating them over and over until victory becomes part of the narrative too." Her smile returned, that strange human expression full of teeth. "The galaxy looks at our archive and sees 12,000 threats. But we look at it and see 12,000 battles we have already practiced for. Every monster is a drill. Every nightmare is training. If something actually came for humanity, something as terrible as the worst things we have imagined, we would not be surprised. We would not be unprepared. We would simply do what we have always done in our stories." "And what is that?" "Survive," said. "Whatever it takes, whatever the cost. That is the one thing all our monster stories have in common, Archivist. The monsters are terrifying, yes, but in the end, humanity is always still standing." She left without another word and sat alone in the archive, surrounded by thousands of years of human nightmares, and understood for the first time why the galaxy was so afraid of such a soft, fragile, weaponless species. It was not the monsters humans had invented. It was the fact that they had invented them at all and kept inventing them and would never, ever stop.